My coworker demanded I mentor him, but expected me to do all his work under the guise of teaching. When I refused, he accused me of sabotaging his career and told our boss, "She's not helping me grow." I quietly showed my boss his copy-paste emails and said, "Funny, since teaching doesn't mean being his personal assistant. I work at a mid-sized tech company in Austin, Texas. I've been here for about 6 years, climbing the ranks to become a senior project manager. I'm known for being approachable and always willing to help out. A few months ago, our team hired a new guy. Let's call him Brian." Brian was in his late 20s, fresh out of a coding bootcamp, and eager to make his mark. He was assigned to my team, and I was asked to mentor him. I was more than happy to help. At first, Brian seemed enthusiastic. He asked a lot of questions, took notes, and seemed eager to learn. But soon, I noticed a pattern. He would come to me with tasks he was assigned, asking for guidance. I'd explain the process, expecting him to take it from there. Instead, he'd ask me to walk him through it, which gradually turned into me doing the work while he watched. I started to feel like I was doing his job. He'd send me emails with subject lines like "Need your expertise" or "Mentorship request," but the content was essentially him offloading his tasks onto me. I tried to set boundaries, encouraging him to take initiative, but he always had an excuse. One day, my manager called me into his office. He looked concerned and said, "Brian has expressed that he feels you're not supporting his growth. He mentioned that you're unapproachable and unwilling to mentor him." I was stunned. I explained the situation, detailing how I'd been helping Brian extensively. My manager seemed skeptical, so I offered to provide evidence. I compiled a folder of emails and messages from Brian, highlighting how he consistently delegated his work to me under the guise of mentorship. I showed my manager the timestamps, the language used, and the lack of effort on Brian's part. My manager reviewed the materials and nodded. "This paints a very different picture," he said. "I'll have a conversation with Brian." A few days later, Brian approached me, visibly upset. "I can't believe you went to management," he said. "You made me look bad." I calmly replied, "I didn't go to management. They approached me after your complaint. I simply provided the context." He stormed off, and from that point on, our interactions were minimal. Brian was reassigned to a different team, and I was no longer his mentor. I continued my work, and my manager commended me for handling the situation professionally. A few weeks later, I heard that Brian was struggling on his new team. Without someone to do his work for him, his performance issues became apparent. Eventually, he was let go. This experience taught me the importance of setting boundaries and documenting interactions. It's essential to support colleagues, but not at the expense of your own responsibilities. Mentorship should be a two-way street, with both parties actively participating. If you find yourself in a similar situation, don't hesitate to speak up and protect your professional integrity. The day Brian was moved to another team, I thought that would be the last I'd hear of him. But of course, it wasn't. About a week later, weird things started happening. It began small. One of the reports I submitted had sections deleted. At first, I thought maybe I made a mistake, but when it happened again, I knew something was off. I double-checked my files before sending them, and they were complete. But once they reached the shared server, pieces would be missing. I brought it up to IT quietly. They looked into it and told me there were logins from another user ID around the same time my files were edited. They wouldn't say who, but I had a good guess. Brian still had access to our project folder. I didn't say anything right away. I wanted more proof. I kept working, but this time I started saving everything on a personal drive and backing it up with timestamps. Then one morning, I walked into the office and found my desk completely rearranged. Monitor tilted, chair lowered, files I left in order scattered everywhere. I asked around if someone cleaned or moved anything. No one knew. Our cleaning staff doesn't touch desks. Security pulled footage. The angle was poor, but there was a short, shadowy figure at my desk late at night. Guess who matched that description? Still, I didn't react. I waited. I kept my head down. I kept doing my work. And I kept documenting everything. Then came the final push. My manager called me into a meeting with HR, said someone submitted a complaint about me, claimed I was withholding important training materials from newer employees, that I was being territorial with projects and fostering a hostile learning environment. HR said it was serious. I was quiet for a second. Then I asked, "Do you want me to open the folder?" They looked confused. I pulled out a USB stick and handed it over. Everything is backed up. Email threads, task assignments, shared drive access logs, timestamps. And yes, this includes proof that I created all my project materials from scratch, including the ones Brian has been copying and editing. There was silence. I told them calmly that Brian was trying to sabotage me after I stopped doing his work. That this wasn't about mentoring anymore. This was about revenge. And I showed them something else, a file Brian accidentally sent to the wrong group chat, where he joked about getting even and teaching me a lesson. HR's eyes widened. They asked for some time to go over everything. I said sure. I had nothing to hide. But I didn't leave the office that day. I stayed late. Something told me I wasn't done yet. Around 7 p.m., the building was mostly empty. I was still at my desk, wrapping up a report, when I heard someone coming down the hallway loud, fast steps. Then Brian appeared. He looked surprised to see me. "You're still here?" he asked. "Finishing up?" I said, not looking up. He stood there for a second, then laughed under his breath. "You know, you act like you're this innocent, hard-working saint. But people talk." I looked at him. "People talk, huh? What do they say?" He shrugged. "That you're cold. That you think you're better than everyone." I stood up slowly, not raising my voice. "Let me guess. You're the one doing all the talking." He didn't answer. Just stared at me, smirking. I added, "The problem isn't that I think I'm better. The problem is that you know I am." He didn't like that. Brian stepped closer. "This isn't over," he muttered. And just like that, he walked away. The next morning, HR sent a company-wide notice. System access will be restricted temporarily for all users pending a security audit. That was their quiet way of dealing with the situation without naming names. I got a private email from HR later that day. "We are continuing our investigation. Thank you for your patience and cooperation." And I waited. Because the worst part? Brian still wasn't fired. Not yet. 3 days after that hallway encounter, things got even stranger. A coworker from another department, let's call her Jenna, stopped by my desk. We weren't close, just nodded in the hallway kind of coworkers. She leaned over and whispered, "Can I ask you something off the record?" I nodded, curious. She hesitated, then said, "Did you really make Brian do all his reports for him? He's been saying you dumped all your work on him while calling it mentoring. That he covered for you for months." I blinked. "Excuse me?" She nodded seriously. "He's been telling people you used him as your assistant and then threw him under the bus when he couldn't keep up." I didn't believe it, but he's been talking to a lot of people. So that's what he was doing now, twisting the story, making himself the victim. I thanked her and went straight to HR. They said they were still reviewing everything and hadn't made a decision yet. I reminded them about the screenshots, the shared access logs, and the accidental group chat message. They promised they were working through it carefully. I could see what was happening. HR was being cautious. They didn't want a wrongful termination lawsuit. They were afraid of retaliation. And meanwhile, Brian was poisoning the well. Slowly, subtly. The next twist came when we had a big presentation with a major client. I was leading it. It was virtual, and everything was supposed to be plug and play. I logged on early, triple-checked the slides. Everything was perfect. Then, mid-presentation, the slides froze. I clicked nothing. The file wouldn't move. I had to wing it for 10 minutes before I finally rebooted and got it working again. It was embarrassing. The client didn't seem too upset, but afterward, My manager pulled me aside. "Are you sure everything was tested?" he asked. I told him yes. Then I went back to check the version that had been uploaded to the shared drive before the meeting. It had been altered 30 minutes before the meeting started. The file name was the same, but the format was corrupted. Only 2 people besides me had access to that folder. One was my manager. The other? Brian. I sent a quiet email to IT again. I didn't say what I suspected. I just asked for another audit of folder activity that morning. While I waited, I started getting cold shoulders from coworkers. One waved at me and quickly looked away. Another one, who used to grab coffee with me on Thursdays, canceled 2 weeks in a row. It was clear that Brian was working behind the scenes, spreading lies and making it look like I was the problem. Then came the anonymous email. I got it in my company inbox. No sender. Just a blank address and a message. "You can't win. HR doesn't care. We all know what you did." That's when I realized this was more than petty revenge. He was trying to break me down. Piece by piece. I forwarded the message to HR. Their response? "We'll add it to the investigation notes." That was it. It became clear I needed to make a move. I wasn't just going to defend myself anymore. I was going to make sure the truth got out, and this time, not just behind closed doors. So I started preparing a full report. Every email, every altered file, every task I completed that Brian claimed he worked on. I even documented Slack messages where he made jokes like, "I'm basically doing her job for her," followed by "JK, LOL." When I was done, the file was 86 pages long. Then I requested a meeting. Not with HR. With our regional director. He didn't know the full story. He just knew there was some conflict between a mentor and a junior team member. I sat in his office, calmly walked him through the evidence, and handed him a printed binder of everything. He didn't say much while reading, just nodded. His face stayed still, but his eyes kept getting wider. At the end, he looked up and said, This is a problem." I nodded. Yes, and not just for me, for the company. Because if this is how we treat people who speak up, how long before others stay quiet? He leaned back and let out a breath. "Let me talk to legal. And IT. We'll handle this." And I knew then the game had changed. But it still wasn't over. It took a few days for the fallout to begin. After my meeting with the regional director, something shifted. The whispers stopped. People stopped avoiding me. Some even came up quietly to say they were sorry for believing the wrong version of the story. A few admitted that Brian had tried to talk them into backing him if things went sideways. I didn't say much to them. I didn't have to. They knew now. On the 4th day, Brian was called into a closed-door meeting with HR, legal, and the regional director. It lasted 2 hours. He walked out pale, looking like the air had been sucked out of him. That afternoon, an official company email went out. "Brian is no longer with the company, effective immediately." That was all it said, but people read between the lines. Still, the story didn't end there. Because damage had already been done to me, to my team, and, surprisingly, to Brian himself. 2 days later, I got a LinkedIn message from someone at another company where Brian had recently interviewed. They wrote, "Hey, just a heads up, he used you as a reference. Claimed you were his direct mentor and biggest supporter." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. I didn't go off. I didn't write a rant. I just said, "He used to work on my team. I suggest you ask him about the presentation he tried to sabotage and the HR complaint he falsified." The recruiter replied with just one word, "Whoa." Not long after that, I heard through the grapevine that Brian didn't get the job. Word had started to get around. Quiet, professional, but clear. He was known now not as a rising star, but as a risk. I wish I could say everything was perfect after that. It wasn't. The truth is, I made mistakes too. I should have set stronger boundaries early on. I should have stopped helping when help started looking like free labor. I tried to be nice instead of being firm. I kept quiet too long, thinking I could fix it quietly. I couldn't. Because silence didn't protect me. It only gave him space to build his version of the story. I owned that. In my next team meeting, I told my staff, going forward, mentorship will be structured, documented, fair. No one should feel overburdened, and no one should expect someone else to carry them. They nodded. I think they understood. Maybe some of them had been in my shoes before. Or maybe they'd been in Brian's. Weeks passed. HR updated its mentorship policy. New hires had to log their training progress. Senior staff got clearer guidelines on what mentoring meant. One late Friday night, I sat at my desk, looking at that binder. 86 pages of evidence. Truth, buried in emails and logs. I didn't shred it. I didn't delete the files. I saved it all. Not because I wanted revenge anymore. Because it reminded me that even in a professional world, people will lie. They will twist stories. And sometimes, they'll smile while they're doing it. But the facts, when laid out clearly, can do what words can't. They burn. Quietly, precisely. And when they do, the ones who played games are left standing in the ashes of their own stories. Brian thought he could twist the truth. But the truth bent back, snapped, and cracked him right across the face. That was the end. Of him, anyway.